moment to connect with you all. So I'm Dr. Ruth Fletcher, and it's my pleasure to be here this evening just to get a moment to share this commemoration with everybody. And so I'm based in London, and so often I'm based at Queen Mary University of London, and I'm a medical lawyer. And so it's to get a chance to think about the influence that Sherie has had on me and others is just a precious moment. So I'm just lightly chairing this event. Hopefully it will be a chance for us to learn from each other and to think with Sherie in mind about what would Sherie do and what might the future of pregnancy counselling be. So let me just begin by just sharing a couple of little reflections before we kind of move into our presenters. So Barbara's, sorry, Catherine, I'm just wanting to check with you because what are we seeing? I can't hear you at the moment. Yeah, great. Okay, somebody just tried to share screen, I think there, was it? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's all that was happening, right?
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so everybody's still coming in. Okay, lovely to see everybody. Okay, we'll get started now then. So Sherie de Burgh, to me, I think about Sherie and I think about the word careful. And I think about careful, not in our typical sense of take care, be careful, but of Sherie making the world full of care. And so to me, I think about Sherie as having this special carefulness and that impression of carefulness is something I still carry with me very much now, personally and professionally. And ever since I knew her as a student in the 1990s, she left a deep impression on me when I think about her still, both personally and professionally. And she taught me really how to make the clock stop for other people. So that was an important aspect of caring, shutting out the world, stopping the clock and making time for people. So this wonderful quality of making time for other people is something I associate with Sherie's carefulness. And the second sort of thing I suppose I think about is very much then building on that is how she taught me and others to make law listen, that in developing counselling, in thinking about how to do counselling in a world of legal restrictions, she made law listen to the work of care. And I've definitely carried that contribution very much forward. And so I'm so grateful to Sherie for all she taught me really about making the clock stop, making time for other people, and yeah, and influencing how we can bring a careful law into being. And I mean, it goes back to the 1990s, as I say, when I was a law student. And so it was, again, you know, wanting to do something at that time in the 1990s when we were living in a world of restrictions around abortion care particularly. And so, you know, we started up a post-abortion support group, a few of us students who had had abortion experiences wanting to reach out. And Sherie was the person we turned to. Sherie and Ruth Riddick were doing workshops then with open line counselling. And so it was through doing that, one of those workshops, that I started to do that voluntary support work as a law student, first of all. And then later on, it became doing research work with Sherie much later, a decade later. We kind of kept that relationship going. So yeah, she's very present. And, you know, again, then she was always somebody who would advise us about, who helped us integrate the support group into the work of the Irish Family Planning Association, then as head of counselling at the time. And then when I left to go and do postgraduate work, Sherie continued on the work of the post-abortion support group, integrated it into the services more generally. And so it was always that brilliant way she had of taking, you know, ideas, working with the ideas that people had and figuring out how to make the most of them and how to integrate that work into the service more generally. And so, yeah, so now I think about her now in the sense of we can see how she was one of the foundational people then in the sense of laying a pathway to a lawful route to abortion care. And she's one of the people who's told us, who's built an infrastructure around valuing counsellors' knowledge, and that we need to pay attention to counsellors' knowledge as evidence and as stories and narratives that law needs to listen to. And so making law listen and stopping the clock for a moment so that we can have that process happen is absolutely, for me, part of Sherie's carefulness. And I'm delighted that we can take this hour together this evening and stop whatever else is going on and think about Sherie and what she would do as we think about what the future of pregnancy counselling might be. So I'd like to hand over now perhaps to Sherie de Burgh, who's going to start us off by sharing a poem, and then we'll move in to hear our other speakers.
Hello.
See you, Sherie.
Hi, how you doing? So this is a poem by Etna Strong, which no matter what house we lived in, this poem always lived printed out in Mum's beloved Comic Sans on the awful 90s computer desk that housed the trusty Dell. So however long that dark, by Etna Strong. Today will be black night and pain will spear each pulse. I know it. The dark tunnel on and on. This I understand. Life that is as death for you. I feel it, I know, understand, feel, because it was for me a like stretch of time. By this I am marked, so that now with utter sureness, I can urge you, beloved human, to search out your courage, even if the bitter stone in your chest is you think forever, and you can take no more. Hold fast, that stone will melt, the tunnel will become a flow of discovery, and it will again be morning. I have seen it.
Thank you, Sherie. Oh gosh, just beautiful photographs there. Listen to the words and watch the images. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us. It's just, yeah, wonderful to see over her lifetime as well, the different images.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll carry Sherie with us in our minds and our hearts very much as we listen to presentations then that are going to take us through the history of pregnancy counselling and on into the future of pregnancy counselling. So I want to hand over now to Catherine Conlon, Dr. Conlon, who is Assistant Professor of Social Policy at the School of Social Work and Social Policy in Trinity College Dublin. I wanted to make sure I got the right title there, Catherine. But yeah, so looking forward to hearing about your work on pregnancy counselling.
Thanks, Ruth. And yeah, Georgie, that was lovely to hear those words that I know Sherie shared with a lot of people regularly. So thanks for those. I don't have slides, Noel, so perhaps if you put up one of Sherie's photographs as you know, an image to have as I talk through. Our theme for this evening is what would Sherie say about crisis pregnancy now? So I'm going to bring us through the kind of journey that crisis pregnancy counselling went through and the journey that Sherie brought it through, I think, as we hear what you say there, Ruth, about making law listen as a kind of the first entry into thinking about what would Sherie say, which we hope is a conversation we'll all have together after myself, Karen and speak. So first of all, thinking about crisis pregnancy counselling and how it emerged first in the aftermath of the 1983 referendum. It was really crisis pregnancy counselling as feminist activism, open door and open line counselling, where volunteers was established by the good friends Ruth Riddick and Sherie de Burgh. And they, you know, established that in 1983 after the Eighth Amendment was inserted into the Constitution. And I had personal communication with Ruth Riddick in 2010 when I was writing my PhD, and Ruth discussed the construct of crisis pregnancy as something that was central to their approach to counselling at the time. And I'm going to read now from Ruth's words as she wrote them to me at the time, and she said, "Crisis pregnancy, I probably was the first to adopt this construct in Irish public discourse. I certainly remember feeling that I was introducing a new concept when I started referring to crisis instead of unwanted, the previous mainstream coinage, a term I always disliked. You'll note from my writings of the time that it is our clients who define their pregnancies as a crisis, and it is this self-identified crisis which propels them to seek help through counselling. So it seemed to me that crisis pregnancy was a more appropriate term, more respectful and honouring of our clients. I also preferred it because it wasn't prejudicial or judgmental. and didn't suggest a predetermined outcome of counselling, deep reflection and decision-making. The crisis pregnancy may be resolved through acceptance, parenting, or action, abortion or adoption. Whatever the outcome, coming to a resolution is a moral process, not a foregone conclusion. At the professional service level, it also seemed to me that use of the term crisis pregnancy was more in keeping with the crisis intervention model employed by Open Door Counselling and our sister service, the Open Line Helpline. In 1991, SPUC took a case to the High Court to prevent student groups distributing information on abortion, and there was also injunctions against Open Door and Well Woman. After the injunctions were brought against Open Door and Well Woman, they in turn brought Ireland to the European Court of Human Rights to seek to challenge Ireland seeking to curtail their activism. And in there, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Ireland violated Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, guaranteeing freedom of expression. And they found that the Irish court's injunction against Open Door and Well Woman from receiving or imparting information on abortion services legally available in other countries was disproportionate and created a risk to the health of women seeking abortions outside the state. And also in 1992, at the same time, we had the X case, a young 14-year-old woman propelled into a horrendous situation with her family after she got pregnant as a result of rape. And this precipitated, a constitutional crisis, really, and a crisis recognizing the impact that the Eighth Amendment was having on women's lives. And an outcome of that was a further referenda by the state that the state moved. And two components of that were to allow freedom to travel outside the state for an abortion, was one amendment that was passed. And another one was the freedom to obtain or make available information on abortion services outside the state. And that referenda, that change into the Constitution allowing the making available of abortions, information on abortion services, excuse me, led to a piece of legislation that brought, I suppose, pregnancy counselling into a new domain and had this legal injunction and regulation around crisis pregnancy counselling, which is quite unusual. While abortion's usually regulated, counselling is rarely regulated in that way. But before that law was passed, the IFPA, relying on a court judgment from 91 that a service relationship would protect an Irish entity providing information or counselling on abortion, the IFPA established its pregnancy counselling services under the auspices of Tony O'Brien and Ruth Riddick. And for the first seminar that we did, remembering Sherie, Ruth talked about this time with Sherie and establishing the pregnancy counselling service in the IFPA. And she said, if Tony O'Brien hadn't asked me back in 1992 whom he should engage for the pregnancy counselling service we were then building at the IFPA, Sherie would not have had the same career she did. I still remember sweating through the hours while she, in her characteristic style, pondered an opportunity which was beyond her previous experience. When Tony asked why I recommended her, I replied that over decades of intimate friendship, I always felt better after talking to Sherie. And she went on to say later, Sherie was my best friend in the history of the world and had already been so for more than 20 years when I suggested to her that she would become the IFPA's first pregnancy counsellor. She had no formal qualifications whatsoever for the role. All that came later, and we're going to hear about all that, I think, over the course of this evening. And it was in 1992 I approached the IFPA to do an analysis of the first 100 women who used that service, and it was then that I had the good fortune to meet Sherie and Ruth and everybody else here that I know. And as I said, in 1995 then, with that new referendum, the state did introduce this act, the Regulation of Information Act, and it allowed doctors and agencies and counsellors to give information on abortion services when a woman requested it. But it required that any information on abortion services, even in the context of counselling, should be provided along with information on parenting and adoption, and may only be given in the context of one-to-one counselling. And we had then following that a really elaborate kind of architecture of regulations around the way in which counselling should proceed when it was to do it, when information on abortion services elsewhere were being given out. And I think that, you know, that is unusual that such an architecture was put around counselling. But I think what we're hearing here is that Sherie had her own way of navigating that, and as Ruth talked about, making the law listen. And we have an opportunity to hear what Sherie said about her approach to counselling in the foreword to the Irish Journey, a booklet of women's stories of abortion that Karen worked with Sherie in compiling. And in that, I'm going to now quote Sherie's words from that foreword. And it was her account of the place and role of counselling. And she said, carrying a sense of shame for your country is a terrible burden. Ireland's refusal to accept the reality of women's lives and the reality of abortion and acknowledge the humanity and rights of the individual woman behind the statistics bestows a sense of shame on women and creates secrecy and isolation to reinforce that feeling. John Bradshaw talks about two faces of secrecy. One face, privacy, is the realm of natural secrecy. The other face, which he calls dark secrecy, is the realm necessitated by the breakdown of privacy. The individual decision that a pregnancy, which is a crisis, will end in abortion is no less painful and sad for an English woman than for her Irish counterpart. But she does not carry the weight of her country's judgment. She is acknowledged by the provision of services which she may decide she needs. Her crisis and decision is private, but not necessarily secret. Irish women's abortions often become dark secrets because of the fear of judgment, and the journey to England almost always involves cover stories and lies. For many women, it is the first major life event that is kept secret from family and friends. The lies are often told to protect those same loved ones from having to cope with this awful crisis. No one ever wants an abortion. No woman ever wants to be in the position of making that choice. I have never met the woman for whom this was an easy or lightly taken decision. It is my experience that women have abortions because they feel that they cannot give a quality of life to that child, whatever their own personal reasons may be. They are not at war with their embryo. They are distressed and saddened by their knowledge that it is the born child they cannot have. It is the commitment to parenting this child that they cannot make at this time. It takes strength to make that major decision, to incorporate it into your life and move on and live with the sense of secrecy and isolation it brings. In the endless debate about abortion, with its emphasis on legal, medical, and political aspects, it is all too easy to forget the personal. Almost every woman I've worked with has said she never saw herself in this position, never saw herself having to make this choice. Crisis pregnancy and the possibility of abortion has become part of her reproductive cycle. In her story, Jean says, in 25 years, I had had 7 children and 2 miscarriages. I couldn't believe that at 45, I was having an abortion. 14 years ago, I worked on a helpline, talking with women who are often standing in phone boxes on cold, windy nights, trying to make contact with someone, anyone who would listen. We have come a long way from there, and the provision of non-directive government-funded counselling services has many positive effects, not least the national recognition that pregnancy may be a crisis. With knowledge of services and information available, many women who do decide to terminate their pregnancies do so in the first trimester. More women feel safe to give Irish addresses. Most productively, non-directive counselling services can provide women in crisis with a safe space where she can focus on herself, her feelings and her issues. No matter who else is involved in her personal life, it is she who will make the final decision and live the consequences. For the Irish woman who decides on abortion, travelling is inevitable. For many women, it is a huge hurdle. Despite this, I have known women to travel against all odds when they believed the decision to terminate was the best they felt they could make. So that was Sherie talking about the conditions under which she was offering, delivering counselling in her careful way and continuously trying to make law and policy listen. We now have a new situation where abortion is legalised in Ireland and women now seek and are provided with services here. And I guess our question here is, what would Sherie say now about what kind of counselling we would hope to have in this new situation? So over to Karen and Anne to pick up the story. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Catherine. Can I forgot to remind everybody, or just to say to everybody, that we are being recorded, just to draw people's attention to that. You probably saw it on the screen, but it is being recorded. So just keep that in mind if you're making any comments or questions later, and it will be posted then publicly to share. So we're going next, to Karen Kiernan, who I'm sure is very well known to everybody as the Chief Executive of One Family. And so, looking forward to hearing from Karen now on more on pregnancy counselling.
Thanks, Ruth. What I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about Sherie's work as I observed it, to try and give it a bit more colour and flavour to what she did and what we did when we worked together, because we actually worked together for nearly 20 years. 3 years in the IFPA, and then until her retirement in 2016 with One Family. And over those many years, our working relationship and personal relationship grew. It deepened as we got to know each other quite well. And we were able to play off each other and kind of complement each other's skills and experience. So good guy, bad guy. I was never the good guy. She was always the good guy. Although she could be firm, as we know as well. But when I started work, I was a young thing in the IFPA. Sherie was very established, very senior. She ran the counselling service, very well respected in her work. And our big project that we kind of spent time together was developing and launching the Irish Journey, a collection of stories of abortions by Irish women. And sorry, that image that's just gone up, just to say, my colleague Barbara Doyle is on the call. She's listed as Counselling One Family. She kindly went through a lot of Sherie's papers to find quotes, and she found this, which I'd never seen before, but it's just so fabulous. We wanted to share it with you. So perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act. Just once with beauty and courage. So if anyone knows what that's from, please tell us later or put it in the chat. But it's just so beautiful. But anyway, the Irish Journey is still, and Catherine has referenced it, it's still a really important piece of work that documented a point in time in social history. She selected the artwork. We worked on the event together. It was really good. And then when Sherie came over to One Family to run our counselling service, she brought all that skills and experience as a crisis pregnancy counsellor to bear on a service that also included supports for women continuing the pregnancy to parent, but also to families that were separating, parents struggling with mental health issues, with domestic abuse, with the pain of lost relationships, lost family life. And she was able to bring her professional and personal experience into this new area of work in an amazing way, because of course she was a single parent herself, and she was comfortable using herself as a resource in her work, not something all counsellors want to do. And Barbara found an example here. A woman had written into our newsletter with a problem about her son, and they were getting into constant arguments every morning about being late for school and getting up, and the parent was very stressed. So Sherie wrote a letter back to her in our newsletter at the time, where she also used Dorje, I'm afraid, as well as herself. So she said, the difficulty you're having with your son isn't unusual at all and takes all kinds of forms. Mine was over homework when my son was about that age. We fought every evening for weeks over his refusal to do it. Eventually, I realized that it was escalating out of hand and I'd have to find a better way to communicate with him over it. So only Dorje knows how that worked out. But it was one of those, I think, points of generosity where she used herself and her life, where it could create a connection and an empathy with somebody who needed it. And in those early years of us working together in One Family, the Crisis Pregnancy Agency had been set up, and we spent a lot of time there, and we made some decisions together, excuse me, about how to strengthen crisis pregnancy counselling as much as possible. So she engaged with and supported everyone, even those who we may have disagreed with, counselling providers who were anti-choice, for example. She was very patient and continued to give information to the third set, say, of Crisis Pregnancy Agency staff who came in. because they wouldn't know all the issues, and she would just patiently go through it again and bring them with her on a journey. She was always very constructive and helpful to others in her field. And she did that so we could continuously improve the quality of counselling in Ireland and ensure better services for women and their partners, for all those people who were pregnant when they didn't want to be, or were pregnant and things went wrong for them. And part of what she was really interested in and concerned about was training, and was about the quality and extent of training that crisis pregnancy counsellors received. And sometimes she would say to me, I wonder how those new counsellors are able to do their job. I haven't trained them. Like, these would be people outside our organisation. She still kind of saw it, that she was the elder lemon and she did have more experience, and she was more than happy to share it. But she, you know, she would be concerned if she didn't get that opportunity. And I know that Anne will talk about the hundreds of people that she did train over the years. And when Sherie was sick, we talked about her working life and how to focus that. And what we wanted to do was try and give more time of her working life to training and resourcing others, so that her learning and knowledge and skills could get passed on, so that it wouldn't leave with her. So while she was very enthusiastic about training, she also didn't suffer fools, as we know. And one of her issues was with social workers, and she did not agree with them doing the counselling training and delivery at all. She was happy to train them around practical things, along with anybody else who worked with pregnant people who didn't want, who were in crisis. But she strongly believes that the training that counsellors went through meant that they were more able and specifically suited to the complexities of the work of crisis pregnancy counselling. And again, we found notes from her training plans. And she said, I offer myself as an ongoing support at the actual training. So when she was delivering training, she would say, I'm here if you need me. And indeed, she would regularly get phone calls from around Ireland, from other professionals, all kinds of practitioners who were in a tricky situation. And she would just quietly get on with helping them. Nobody necessarily knew. We weren't necessarily funded for it. It's just what she did because she wanted everyone to get the best service possible. So as I said, even with organisations that did not agree with all the choices or options being available to women, Sherie kept working with them, charming them, and eventually they were paying her to train them in post-abortion counselling. And she was really able to open people's eyes around what it was really like for women who needed post-abortion counselling. And again, we found some notes from her post-abortion counselling training folder where she reflected on hindsight and how some women who've had an abortion struggle in hindsight. So I just want to read you out a little bit from this. So she's instructing the counsellor, ask her to tell you in her own time what was happening for her at the time of her pregnancy. So this is asking the client. And then she's got in brackets some notes about this. So in hindsight, everything seems different. We could have done this or that if we'd known that this or that was going to happen, but we didn't know. And we did make the best decision we could at the time. So going back over her own story slowly and at ease can really help the client to reconnect with what was happening for her then and why she made the decisions she did. So she really, shared and worked and thought about how to bring the woman back to the decision she made and help her go through her own journey and process around that. And I'm sure there's much more written. I just have a few little bits to share with you. So I think she had a very central role in ensuring that crisis pregnancy counselling was understood and resourced in Ireland, that its practice was relevant, that it was useful to whomever was in front of her, the woman, the man, the couple, as well as being legally compliant with whatever the legal framework was she was operating in at the time. So as Catherine referenced earlier, she developed a very unique way of running her crisis pregnancy sessions where the woman was reassured up front, you'll get whatever information you want or need. The woman got to tell her story, lay out all her dilemmas, discuss whatever options she wanted to. And although all three options had to be mentioned, Sherie did this in a very subtle way, and she centered the conversation on what the client wanted. She also wasn't afraid to support the woman with practical arrangements if she decided that an abortion was the appropriate solution for her. So this was done very bravely within the law, but she stretched the boundaries to ensure that clients were served as well as possible in what was quite a ridiculous legal context, let's be honest. Angels on the head of a pin, Irish solution, etc. Ridiculous. So she developed an ethical practice within this context of quite crazy state legislation. And she knew that if she and her team stayed with this person-centered practice, they couldn't go wrong. They couldn't break the law. They were staying with the woman and what she needed. But she kept adapting to what was required or needed given the external environment. So what was going on politically, what was said in the media, you know, what were women hearing, experiencing, and then feeling because of being triggered perhaps with what was going on. She kept adapting. She had a vision for what counselling should and couldn't be like, and a personal mission to continuously improve counselling. She stepped up and she led on this. She was a very quiet and very effective leader. Nobody asked her to do that. She wasn't paid to do that. She did that because she knew that was the right thing and that that's what she could contribute. And that's, I think, what continues to live on. So I believe that she held the integrity of crisis pregnancy counselling practice on behalf of the country, even though she wasn't necessarily tasked with doing that. She saw a space and an opportunity and she filled it. So she'd be at a meeting disagreeing with someone, smiling. She had her high quality training with counsellors and other service providers. She had her personal presence, her skills, experience, and phenomenal empathy that she brought to her work with individual clients. So here's a quote from her. It kind of similar to Catherine, to what you read earlier from the foreword of the Irish Journey. And this is a closing paragraph in a submission she wrote around the changes needed to abortion legislation. And it'll be quite a few years after the Irish Journey. So here's what she wanted to say. No woman ever wants to have an abortion. No woman ever wants to discover she's pregnant and for her immediate feelings to be distress, fear, shame, devastation. No woman ever wants to be in the position of seeing termination of her pregnancy as the only way forward. But abortion is a reality for thousands of Irish women every year who can't see how they can give a quality of life to this child at this time. As policy and lawmakers, as service providers and educators, we need to acknowledge their experience and support them and our society to move forward without shame or stigma. So I wonder, are we still on that journey, and how much have things improved since Sherie wrote that? So for me, her legacy is around her ethics, the modes of communication, how she communicated around crisis pregnancy and how unique it was, post-abortion counselling, the tools she used, her perspectives. We're still using them in One Family and in My Options, and hopefully other counselling services maybe as well. And her practices live on in the quality counselling that women are still receiving today, even though we have an abortion service in Ireland. So to close, Barbara found this document. This was all that was in the document. It's her Comic Sans font, which was strewn throughout the building, even though there was a document about what font to use. Sherie didn't apply to her. She used the bloody Comic Sans all the time. So something for us all to consider, maybe. Connect with the negative feeling. Know that the feeling is in you, not in the outside world. Know that you are not defined by the feeling. Because you feel bad doesn't mean you are bad. Change in you changes everything. And that's what she gave us. Phenomenal, heart-inspired, loving change for many people who did not have the sympathy or empathy of greater society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Just beautiful. Just listening to you both, I'm just, really thinking about holding on to the contributions that have been made and have been developed in such restrictive circumstances. And it's so interesting to think about, the idea of crisis pregnancy, and the idea of crisis as something that Sherie and so many others made into not an authoritarian intervention, the way we often think of crisis, but a woman-centered experience, and we really need to hold on to that, even though we're in different times now, that way of approaching crisis as you center the person, give them the time, you know, and it's just really striking me listening to both of you that, yeah, that resource was developed in difficult times, and we very much need to think about how to build on it now. Fantastic. Okay, so over now to Anne McCarthy, our third speaker, and delighted to have you here. There you are on my screen, great. And so Anne is the lead tutor of the Crisis Pregnancy Counselling Skills and Masterclass Programme at the Department of Adult and Community Education at Maynooth University. And Anne's going to speak to us now about her expertise on pregnancy counselling. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Ruth. I'll just pop up my slides straight away, get that bit done. Always takes a mo. Let's see. There it was. There it was. Okay. Okay, are you seeing the slides? Cool, thanks. Good, good. Okay, so I've just called this the intelligent heart because it was, and thank you, first of all, Karen and Catherine, for asking me to contribute to this. It's such an honor, you know, being part of this evening. I've known Sherie too, but to be here, I feel her presence quite close actually at the moment, if I'm allowed to say that. And when I was thinking about tonight, I said, my goodness, I'm so glad Catherine is doing what you're doing. And I loved what you were doing, your contribution, Catherine, and Karen as well, in each in different ways. So I hope what I'm bringing is just another piece of the pie to talk and share about Sherie. But when I think of her, this is what I really experienced this with her. And I had the joy of working right beside her in the classroom with students, and some of you I see are here tonight, and so it's lovely to see some of those faces reappearing in the windows tonight. So the intelligent heart was something that Sherie was embodied and valued in every other person that she met. And when I first met Sherie was in 2007. We were brought together when the Crisis Pregnancy Agency, as it was then, now the Sexual Health and Crisis Pregnancy Programme, but then it was the Crisis Pregnancy Agency, had approached Maynooth University to create and develop a postgraduate training programme close to Sherie's heart, the training there again that Karen had mentioned, for counsellors who were supporting women facing a crisis pregnancy. So in 2007, we were very much in the pre-new law stage. We were still very much working with that mandated counselling. And it's really good. I just want to mention somebody who's in the group there tonight. I see Mary Ryan, Dr. Mary Ryan, wonderful Mary, who was the most amazing director of this program, and another joy, part of the team. We worked together on this for many years. So as Ruth has said, I was lead tutor. I was lucky enough to be lead tutor for the certificate program. And which later we developed, if you like, a sister program for that called the Masterclasses, or the Masterclass program. And I'll talk a little bit about both of those separately. So the Crisis Pregnancy Counselling Skills program was the result of very hard work on a very interesting committee. And that could be the subject of yet another talk. I can tell you, anyone who's been on those committees knows that they are not tea parties, although there was always lovely tea and scones provided by, and sandwiches, I remember, which were very necessary. And something we learned actually throughout the program was the importance of food when teaching anything to do with crisis pregnancy counselling, particularly the topic of termination, that food came into it. And I'll just mention that. I'll tell you a bit about that later. So this is just to give you, this is one of the brochures. There were many brochures, and every year this was produced. And so this is the last one. This is the one that just predated the law. So this would have been the final certificate course. that we can see there, and it was in the Department of Adult Ed and Community Education. So that was the case. And the purpose of it was, of the crisis pregnancy counselling skills, it was a year-long program for, as we say, initially it was for counsellors. It did develop and it evolved hugely, and very much with the help of Sherie. But it was a course for anyone who may encounter, for professionals who may encounter a woman with a crisis pregnancy in their professional lives. And it wasn't quite at the beginning that we had counsellors and nurses and midwives, chaplains, teachers, doctors, youth workers and social workers. The social workers managed to get in eventually. We had a few wonderful social workers who were there, and it was interesting to see the if you like, the cohort change over time. And initially it was very much the funded counsellors who came on the course, and they came in droves and were our wonderful beginning of this program. But as the course grew and developed and a little bit of the word got out there, it changed, and every year we never knew who would come. And then it was wonderful was also to see women, African Irish women, coming along onto the course, and some doctors, some young doctors who were doing their training, who discovered the value of reflective practice early in their careers. As we went through this. So these are just some, I won't take you right through this, but these were some of the goals of the counselling skills program. But I do think they're important, because this is what the committee, if you like, and we together, and Sherie and Mary and I and others would have brought together. So we would define and explore the key aspects of crisis pregnancy counselling, enhance crisis pregnancy counselling skills in the context of the reflective model of learning. And what that means, that's a really important thing to me, because we're so much in our heads, and people who have a crisis, they get stuck in their heads. And the process of reflective practice, which Sherie lived, she lived the reflective model of living. But it meant that we really, the experience of the students that they brought in their own lived lives, both professional and personal lives, that itself became part of the learning of the program. So I have to say, for me, it was one of the happiest times of my working life, was working on this program. I would just love every weekend when it came around. I would skip into work. It was just fantastic. And I would meet with these amazing students, and we would sit together and get to know each other, but learn and really grapple with the complexities of this work. So we would look at situating crisis pregnancy in the intercultural context, and exploring core professional issues, which are constantly, as we know, in that time between 2007 and as it continues to this day, but certainly over the 10, 11 years that the course existed, that these professional issues grew and changed and evolved. And we also worked to raise awareness of ethical, legal and professional issues. So there were other contributors with barristers, Jenny Bulbulio, the barrister, and other members. Marguerite McCarthy indeed stepped in when Sherie became ill for the concluding workshop. So the masterclass program, that came about in 2011, and I've the sea there. I just thought I'd put the sea. That's Skerries, near where I live. That's St. Patrick's Island that we're looking at there, and it just reminds me of how the program grew and just spread, a bit like St. Bridget's cloak. I love that. I always often use that as a metaphor for lots of things. But this particular program, it began in 2011 and continued right up until the doorstep, if you like, the front door of the pandemic in 2020. But that very first masterclass was Sherie. Sherie led it. It was on the termination of pregnancy. It was the first time beyond, I suppose, in the class, in the certificate course, we created very much the safety of the classroom space, where people could come and be themselves and share and work together, and not necessarily always agree, which is absolutely the way it should be. but it was a very safe place in which the learning was nurtured and fostered. The masterclass opened us up to a more open, if you like, it was one-day workshops where anybody could come. And it in that way, it was, if you like, open to the ocean. And with that, on the very first workshop or masterclass, there were protesters, and it was there was quite a protest mounted outside the John Hume building and in campus. And my colleagues, the team, as I call us, were like, they became like, oh, I don't know, they were just amazing. They were like, what would you call it, guerrilla warfare tactics. They just threw a cordon of security around us, literally and figuratively, in order to protect the group, the learners, if you like, the participants, from the external protests that were quite emotional and quite vociferous on that day. And I remember the day it poured from the heavens, and I thought, surely that will dampen the spirits of the protesters. But no, this visceral shouting continued throughout the day, and it came through the windows, even though with good strong windows. And a decision was made to bring lunch in, keep people in, everybody was kept safe. But it was the most extraordinary experience. And to have that shared with Sherie was leading it. We actually taught the class. We held the space. And I remember in the afternoon, sitting with the participants, who I think were quite shocked by this, obviously were quite shocked. And we gave them a space just to reflect on how they were feeling. And this was new in this type of way of working, where you would take a group of professionals and say, tell us now how you're feeling. And the place went quiet. And we let the quiet settle, Sherie and I heard this one voice coming from the group saying, I asked them, what did it feel like to be called a murderer? Because that was the word that was coming up the window, through the wall of window. And one woman spoke and she said, I think I now know what it must feel like to be a woman traveling to England. So and the reason I tell that story is not to create new shock or trauma. It's really but the way that working with Sherie, she and I were able to make of a really difficult situation into a lived experience. So those people who came to that class today went away changed, which is the process of counselling itself. So in a way, working with Sherie, wherever you were, the counselling was never, ever, ever very far away. And we moved on. I'm happy to say that there was a little continuing of some protests after that, but it fizzled out and we went on with the work. And as we say, the masterclass program, and many of you are in the group tonight, are very familiar with it and are great contributors. And we've learned so much from all the people who've come over the years, while we've held so much there in, as Ireland has progressed and changed the constitution and changed our law. So the embodiment that Sherie these are the essentials of counselling. And I apologize if I'm telling someone who knows this backwards, but I just thought it'd be useful to just bring it, just the very basics of humanistic counselling principles, and put some of them out here. There are others besides this, but it very firmly puts the person at the centre. And as Sherie and as Karen has noted, if we put the woman, the person at the centre, we can't go wrong. We won't impose our judgment, or even unconsciously, we're protected, if you like, from putting our views on the person, because one of the essential things of counselling and of the training that I'm referring to, both masterclass and the certificate course, was that it took no position. It was neutral. It accepted whatever opinion a person had was absolutely fine. So there was no agenda. It was student-centered. In this case, for counselling, it was person-centered. And the key attributes that are a lifetime's work are empathy, being non-directive. You don't tell someone what to do. the belief is that within every person, they have a knowing of their own answer. And a counselor, when you hold that in yourself as a counselor, when I'm sitting in that space in that space that exists between one person and another, that somehow brings about a confidence and a settling inside the person where they can find their truth. The non-judgment is essential, and the listening, active listening. And it's always interesting whenever we would teach the active listening part or encourage people to really hear one another. Those who weren't counselors who came afterwards, or those I'd say, I realized that I'm not really, that I need to learn to listen more. I'm too much thinking of my own answer first. So this listening, these are the qualities, when they're brought to life, are really, really powerful. Okay. So these are words I've taken from Carl Rogers, who was one of the, I suppose, the key fathers of the humanistic psychotherapy counseling movement. And these are his own words. But when I read them and listened to them, I actually listened to them as well. I have them on tape. To hear his words speaking this, it was like listening to Sherie in a way. So I've changed his words slightly and I put in you. So what the activity of counseling and the counseling that Sherie completely embodied and lived was, you accept you fully as you are. And I know myself, when I would sit with her, I just felt grounded and I felt more real, more me. And I tried to listen to your words and their meaning. So, and it does say try to listen, because some people are easier to listen to than others. So you really have to work, and that accepting you fully as you are is empathy. These are lived, real qualities that make us human. To hear the person hidden within, to hear beyond the distress, the anger, the frustration, the silence, the confusion, the chaos, the crisis, to hear beyond that and to hear the person hidden within, and to try to genuinely understand, to really understand where they're coming from, what's making it like this for them, and really care about you in an unconditional way. So these are words, and I just kept them here, the heart of crisis pregnancy counselling. So I began with the intelligent heart, and these are some of the qualities. So Sherie's legacy to counselling is all this is possible. And when they come together, creates a powerful climate for change and growth, for drawing out the potential of the client. So in a short, very short space of time, I've sort of tried to bring together the essential qualities that Sherie had lived and taught us all. She was absolutely devoted to her clients and to the women she helped. And I knew little, and all the time I was learning from her. I'll just share one little thing. We used to meet every now and then. She and I would meet up just to see what we needed to do this year on the course, on the training course or whatever, in Maynooth or in the master class, or if something big was going on in the world and we needed to chat about it. So where we would meet was in Matt the Trasher's, across the road from the old Pembroke Road office. And we declared it one day. I said, gosh, we're here for hours. What'll Karen say? I said, tell you what, Sherie, this is called a long, late lunch, okay? Because we're working. This is called work. And she would be kind of guilty. It was so sweet. And I say, it's okay. I'll tell them we're working. Okay, so it's on me. All right. So I must say, I'm so grateful for those afternoons that we shared together. And we did talk an awful lot about the work. We really did share the breadth and depth of it. I just want to share one last thing. The last time I was with Sherie, and it was so touching. Mary, you'll remember this too, Mary Ryan. And Sherie came, she gave of herself in this work until the very end. And the last time was when she fittingly came to one of those Friday afternoon workshops in Maynooth. And we always had our guest lecturers, our guest speakers. So at this stage, Sherie was no longer a guest. She was one of the gang on Friday afternoons in Maynooth. So we'd have some lunch first, usually with Mary, and David would often, another colleague would often pop in, and we'd sit and chat together. And when she came to that particular workshop, Sherie, my experience of her up to then, she would stand the whole way throughout an entire day's workshop. She would never sit. She would always stood. This time she sat, but she sat on a desk and she was swinging her legs. And I just looked at her, and she was wearing a silk scarf around her head because she hadn't been long from surgery and her other treatment. But she looked so beautiful sitting on the desk there. And she took the class through the essentials of counselling a woman with a crisis pregnancy. In the way she was there, living each part of the counselling essentials. And I can still see her smiling face as she met this group, as if she were teaching again with the freshness, as if for the first time. So each time she sat with the group, that was the way it was, as if it was for the first time, but with her endless, infinite wisdom. She lived these qualities, and many of you here know this evening will know them too. So I'm just going to give one little more quote from Carl Rogers, and then I'll stop. It just made me think of Sherry's work here. And he would say, to work with a person in this way means entering the perceptual world of the other and being perfectly at home in it. For the time being, you lay aside your views and values of your world without prejudice. To be empathic in this way is a complex, demanding, strong, yet subtle and gentle way of being. That, to me, is like Sherie, but they are actual spoken words of Carl Rogers. And I suppose now we are 3 years since the implementation of the new law, and we're in a different space, in a different phase. Counselling is no longer mandated. It's available to women and is paid for by the state and available from the funded counselling services. It's now a woman's choice if she chooses counselling. So now, I suppose, in keeping with the theme of tonight, I'll hand you back to Ruth with the question, where to now with counselling? Thanks.
Thanks so much, Anne. Just such a treat to get to listen to you. Thanks so much. Yeah, listening to you, I was really struck. You mentioned being held a couple of times, and it's just that experience of that Sherie facilitated, but also, yeah, being held in the moment, being held in this new environment, being held with a crisis. And so I suppose, yeah, what would very much you've taken us to thinking about now, turning to our audience, hopefully we've got such a rich audience here this evening. So it'd be really wonderful to be able to invite some comments and questions as we think a bit more with Sherie in mind about, yeah, what would she do in this new landscape? So because we're at a point, I guess, right, where, yeah, there's been this absolutely phenomenal constitutional change, a phenomenal social change has crystallized, but then we also, have the stigma and is still there, but has shifted perhaps, right, to later abortion, and to, there's barriers that are raising obstacles for people who are, poorer, more marginalized, more vulnerable. And so perhaps the landscape has shifted a bit, and we're trying to think about, what Sherie would do in order to kind of develop counselling, to hold counselling in that humanistic way you've been talking about, for grounding that knowledge and that commitment, as we think about how to make law listen, right, to counselling in the current moment. So it'd be wonderful, just given we have so many fantastic, as everybody's been mentioning, it's great to see who's here. So it'd be great to take a bit of time now just to invite comments, or if anybody wanted to ask any questions or share any stories they have themselves, or any comments they'd like to make, what Sherie might do now. Give people a bit of time to mull it over.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Rosie.
Yeah.
Amazing to see you.
And
Oh my
you,
goodness.
you're fantastic,
Wow.
Karen and Catherine, and there's so many others. I have to go back to the 90s. I'm sorry.
Jeez.
Go back to the establishment when Sherie was director of counselling. She recruited me and my colleague Nina in Galway to set up the crisis counselling service then, and that was when Tony was CEO. And we had, it was such a journey of intrepidation and hiding and attending media launches and, you know, being the counsellor hiding down the back, and myself and Mina and Sherie, and then hightailing it down to Bridge Street to get lunch and to hide away from the media. So yeah, so that was back in the, I think we said in the IFPA recently, that was back in 94. So that was when I met Sherie first, 93, 94. And we had days where there was myself and Sherie and Linda Wilson Long from Well Woman. Were at those very early meetings that Anne referred to in the Crisis Pregnancy Agency, that were really challenging at that time. And I was there because I took over from Sherie when she left to go to One Family in the IFPA, and I was director of counselling then. And as Ruth and Catherine and everybody who was doing your research and writing your books, that was some time that we all came through. But in it all, and I have to say, you know, that a part of Sherie and my knowing of her all of these years and working with her and meeting her, and I'm sorry, Anne, we used to go to the Gresham to meet, the three of us, and hide down the back where nobody could see us. But we had a laugh. In it all, we had a laugh. And because I think that's what kept us sane with everything that was going on and all the challenges that we went through, and all the changes from, you know, the IFPA, from One Family, from Well Woman. There was so much took place, and through all of that we had a laugh, and we worked, I have to say, incredibly creatively. With obstacles and laws and everything else. And Sherie showed me a few moves that could be managed to overcome any obstacle that was in the way. Yeah, so there I have very fond memories over many years. She was not adverse to protesters. She knew how to handle them well. But there is one thing that Sherie always said, and then it was my experience as well, and Linda's, and I know if she was here, it's what she would say, that from those early days, that if it wasn't for Anne Frady and it wasn't for BPAS, no woman in Ireland would have their reproductive services. No woman would be able to access an abortion in the UK, because they worked and moved hell and high water to help us. It was an amazing time. And, you know, and I think that really has to be remembered in the history of it. And I know that Sherie would want that remembered so much. So very amazingly lovely memories and laughs. We had lots of laughs, hair pulling, but lots of laughs in between it. And Dorje, you don't know me, but I know a lot about you. Not in recent years, of course, but I hope you're a photographer, because no matter what was going to happen, your mum was going to get you through that photography course. And that was my memory of Sherie. Just, yeah, he's great. No, got a camera. No, he's going.
Managed it all right.
Yeah, so I hope I'm not embarrassing you now, but oh yeah,
No, no.
that was her. That was her mission, Georgie. That was one of her missions in life. We had great fun together, great times, lots of stress, but great times and great laughs. And I'm
It's
sure.
like, yeah, the creativity and the laughter. I love the way you mentioned that, Rosie, because yeah, exactly. So many stresses and strains, but absolutely like valuing the creativity and the warm times
Yeah.
is you know, the warmth that was generated, yeah, in times of struggle saw us through a lot. And I guess we're trying to think about how to value that and carry it forward, so that we have a law, you know, and a situation environment which is warm, and we try and bring that along into our regulation. So I'm sure there's other people who might like to share a few words or some thoughts of Sherie, or just questions or comments you might have right now. You can wave at us or just drop in. Yeah, did I see Liz? Did you want to come in there? Great.
Yes, it's all just taking me back hugely, because I was around at the beginning of Open Door, before Open Line. And I was actually thinking about it yesterday, because there was always a party on Valentine's night in Open Door counselling, which was just wonderful. There was that whole thing. And I think you were touching on it, just the warmth and people coming together. And also people just being so supportive. You know, I first got involved because when I knew Ruth, I was a friend of Ruth's, and I used to get phone calls because, you know, a woman would have arrived into Open Door and a picket would have arrived outside while the woman was inside. And so I used to go up and walk through the picket with women on the way out because they'd be terrified going out on their own. So all of that stuff, and all the way through the, you know, I also did the, you know, the helpline and met people in pubs with funny hats and all kinds of stuff, you know, just insane. And the cosmopolitans with blacked out, you know, the information, like, just, you know, when you think about it now, it's just, you know, it's just incredible. And I remember Sherie through all of that, she was always around. And always with, yeah, huge warmth. And I used to bump into her then later on when I was in and out of One Family. Yeah. So, yeah, just, it goes back a long way. Yeah.
Back a long way, yeah. Long history, right? But we're thinking about the future as well, right? Like what she facilitated and what she brought into being. But yeah, trying to think about, that there's a wonderful future potentially there, valuing that warmth and that possibility, taking it forward, while at the same time we know we're working in a climate that's differently difficult, I suppose. Anyone else want to share any comments or thoughts?
I was just thinking of the you know, that warmth that we've evoked in the last time. And I mean, you know, you were on the other end of the line, Liz, and what Sherie had written in the foreword was saying, you know, that she was talking with women who were standing in phone boxes on cold, windy nights, you know, and I guess Sherry's voice had a huge depth of warmth in it. And the idea that she enveloped, you know, somebody who was in that really lonely, cold, you know, buffeted kind of situation. And thankfully we are in a position now where hopefully that isn't kind of no longer the conditions under which women are seeking help. But yeah, as you say, Ruth, you know, bringing a lot of all that with us seems really important.
Yeah, bringing a lot of that with us, exactly, holding on to that inventiveness. And perhaps now we're trying to, you know, think about that inventiveness in relation to the way, you know, that this early late division has developed in terms of stigmatizing differently, you know, different groups of women and differently situated experiences across the country. So yeah, the obstacles have shifted slightly, but we can mobilize the resources that Sherie built for sure into the future. So I suppose I'm just looking at the clock here. I think will we I think we'll, unless anybody else wanted to add any comment or reflection, we might move to Dorje.
Can I speak before Dorje? Would that be
Yes, sure,
okay?
Karen, yeah.
Because what I have to say isn't as
Want to do that?
isn't as moving as Dorje's poem.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, in terms of thinking about what Sherie would say or do now, we're in a different time. I think she would still see the value of counselling for those who need it. And there will be those who need it, and we still have those coming in to One Family. But because I think she lived under that regulated counselling and the mandated counselling, that isn't something she'd ever want to go back to. But I think she would see this huge value in trying to keep the ethics and the practice of supporting women and men through these difficult reproductive issues and parenting on their own and going through separation and all that other work that she took on when she came to One Family, that would be really valuable. So that's just what I think she would want. And I just wanted to come back and just update people around the Memorial Fund, because when we started these events a couple of years ago, we launched a Sherie de Burgh Memorial Fund, and so many of you have been so generous to that, and we really, really appreciate it. And it was set up initially for perinatal counselling and as a fund for very vulnerable families, because Sherie worked a lot with young migrant mothers. And we wanted to try and have some kind of fund whereby we could support those families where they needed additional resources. But actually, when we had the event last year, we explained that we were going to use it differently because of COVID and the pandemic. The demand for counselling, I would say, in everybody's services is absolutely huge. So we've had far more people want counselling, people not able to move on and leave counselling, and we put on extra counselling hours because we have been unsuccessful in getting statutory funding, unfortunately. So we spent the fund on that last year, but we'd like to start moving back to the original aims. So just to say thank you to everybody who donated, and to say there's still a huge need. If anyone would like to make a donation in honour of Sherie, we'd be very happy to take it, and you can donate through our website. And it's been a pleasure to work on this event again with Catherine, and to have Dorje give us time and speak again. Thank you, Dorje. And to Anne for participating, and of course to Ruth for chairing for all of us. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen, so much. Okay, so maybe we'll hand over to Dorje then for his poem, and then.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks to everyone for all that you shared. It's been really wonderful. So Everything is going to be all right by Derek Mann. How should I not be glad to contemplate the clouds clearing beyond the dormer window and a high tide reflected on the ceiling? There will be dying, but there is no need to go into that. The lines flow from the hand unbidden, and the hidden source is the watchful heart. The sun rises in spite of everything, and the far cities are beautiful and bright. I lie here in a riot of sunlight, watching the day break and the clouds flying. Everything is going to be all right.
You're on mute, Ruth, I think.
Sorry, thanks. I was just saying thanks so much, Dorje. You've been such a presence. I think we were hearing, earlier, you've been such a presence in our lives as we listened to Sherie talk about you. So it's just so lovely to hear your words and watch those pictures. So thank you. So thanks to everybody. It's just been, Sherie is so present, I think, let's carry her with us, you know, as we keep going and as we keep evoking that spirit of creativity, that warmth, that commitment, and also that sense of, you know, self-critique and laughing at the things when they go wrong was such an important way. So thanks everybody for coming here. A big thank you to Karen and Catherine for getting us organized and, you know, making this time for us all to commemorate and to think about Sherie. It's so precious when everybody's under so much pressure and everything. So thank you for keeping that going. And yeah, we're looking forward to hearing how the things develop with the fund. And thanks so much to Anne and to Noel behind the scenes as well, who's making it all happen. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ruth.